The Black Lives Matter and women's suffrage movement, similarities and differences.
Similarities: hunger strikes. At the University of Vermont, staff members have vowed to refrain from eating until school administrators answer a list of 9 demands seeking racial justice. Just like in the early 1900s, the women refused to put on prison uniforms to work. The guards became violent, kicking and beating the prisoners in what became known in the suffrage movement as the Night of Terror. Women again resorted to hunger strikes. Upon their release, many were too weak to walk on their own. Similarities: picketing. Women started picketing in front of the White House for women's suffrage, women's right to vote during January 1917. On August 28 of that year, 10 suffragists were arrested. Just like recently in the Black Lives Matter, Vicki Garrison chanted through a megaphone as a group of 25 people followed behind her. Another pair held up a banner from the NAACP. Similarities: arrests. Minneapolis police apprehended Black Lives Matter protesters and supporters who blocked or chained themselves along a light rail transit line near U.S. Bank Stadium, temporarily halting trains carrying fans to the Super Bowl. Like the women's suffrage rights in the early 1900s, 10 suffragists were arrested as they protested outside the White House to protest the Anthony Amendment to the Constitution that would guarantee women's right to vote.
Similarities: parades. Dozens of members of Black Lives Matter inserted themselves into the parade, marching with raised fists. They chanted and repeatedly stopped the parade for a few seconds at a time. Just like in 1913, the first major national efforts were undertaken, beginning with massive parades in Washington, D.C. On March 3rd, one day before the inauguration, President Woodrow Wilson, organized by Alice Paul for the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Similarities: lobbying. Black Lives Matter entities is teaming up with a more seasoned federal policy group, the National Black Justice Coalition, to bring in around 36 activists to meet with members of Congress who support their cause. Just like the index card in the women's suffrage movement, but a member of Congress told a visiting suffrage lobbyist that he didn't get much mail on the issue. Headquarters would then send word to his district, and his supporters would make sure he did. Differences: women's suffrage used pageants. German actress Hedwig Riker wears the costume of Columbia, with other suffrage pageant participants standing in the background in front of the Treasury Building in Washington, District of Columbia, on March 3, 1913. The performance was part of a larger suffrage parade. Black lives have yet to hold pageants.
Differences. Different audiences. The women's suffrage movement mainly focuses on the younger women and government officials like the president, while on the other hand, the Black Lives Matter movement mainly focuses on African American communities. Black Lives Matter and women's suffrage movements. Does reform movements impact America for the greater good of all people? Yes, reform movements impact America for the greater good of all people because these reform movements are trying to get everybody to see that everybody is equal in their rights, whether it's the women's rights or it's the African Americans' rights. How do reform movements of the antebellum era continue to inspire change in society today? Women's suffrage continues to inspire change in society today because the women who fought for their right to vote prove that if a group of people want change, they can have the right to voice for change for the better.